Here we go. All right, we're live. Today I have Dave, and we're going to be talking about Dave's experience with the CCDC. So, can you sort of give some background on that competition, Dave?
Yeah, absolutely, Candy. So CCDC is called the Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. I believe I pronounced that right. Anyway, the sign of a student. Brain is all jumbled. So this is a contest that has been going on for a number of years. I think about a decade, a little over a decade now. And what this essentially is that you have different tiers. There's the state level, right? So that's like the different states in America compete, and then you have different regions that you eventually progress to if you do well enough, right? So there's like Midwest, there's Southeast, there's Mid-Atlantic. And then there's like, the Pacific, the Hawaiian Islands, and like some of the US territories and things like that. And everybody competes in that. And then whoever wins that goes on to nationals. And it is kind of an important contest. There's a lot of money that's involved in it for schools. There's some national funding that come from that. If people are aware that there are centers of academic excellence that are currently run in the United States. And these are different schools that have received designations from the federal government that certify that they are teaching cybersecurity education to some metric and some degree. And I actually came from one of those schools.
Yeah,
I
me
came from
too.
a community college.
Yeah.
And so the level of knowledge and skill that I got from that institution was phenomenal. It went above and beyond. But
Nice.
CCDC was the icing on the cake. So for 8 hours at the state level, you, as a blue teamer, you compete as a IT team that was brought onto a company that just recently fired their IT team, and they're currently under siege. Now, what that basically means is that there's a red team, and that's comprised of volunteers, and they're trying to break into the systems. But at the same time, while you're defending these systems, you're also doing something called injects. So these are like business activities that need to take place. Like, the CEO is just like, or the CIO is like, hey, we don't have a disaster recovery plan. You need to generate one. And so you probably got like 20 minutes, and now you have to generate a disaster recovery plan while you're trying to defend your systems. And then, there will be other things like, hey, my niece needs to do this activity. She really likes this application. Can you install it in the systems? And then you need to respond to that. And you need to respond that in a professional manner, right? No, you probably don't want to install an application right now. We're currently trying to recover from a cyber attack where your website was brought down. And most of the time the game resolves around you're some kind of e-commerce site, right? And the idea is to kind of give you some real world experience in that, like, there will be old, outdated systems that are in your environment. The students are given a Palo Alto firewall. There's a lot of companies that do partnerships with CCDC, so the students can get access to these resources. Like, I've been fortunate that I've been able to take some Palo Alto training through CCDC. And then the students will get hands-on with it, right? So you usually have some access like about a week before the contest where you can get in, you can see the environment. And really what differs CCDC from CyberForce is that CyberForce, the students have engagement with the systems for a very long time leading up to the day of the contest. And they are able to modify the systems to a degree, right? You can install different pieces of software on there. If you find exploits inside of the machines that have been compromised, you can remove those. CCDC, there is none of that, right? This is the machines get reset the day of the competition, and then you have 8 hours to like fix whatever you found was broken. And you may be given broken systems, right? You may be given systems that the database for your email server doesn't connect, right?
Nice.
And you need to figure that out, right? And maybe
Love
that's
it.
because somebody moved a Windows file with carriage returns into the Linux system, and now you need to figure out, how do I remove carriage returns from the
That's
system?
awesome.
So there's a lot of nuance to this, right? It's not just a cybersecurity contest, it's also a system administration contest.
Yeah.
And I think that's what a lot of people might get hung up on. Your first job is probably not going to be a SOC analyst, is probably
True.
not going to be you know, something like that. You might get that job, but it takes a lot. You need to really apply yourself in order to get to those. And I think CCDC does give you that platform to do that.
Nice.
And so that's the blue side of things. So I just recently volunteered as a red teamer, and I hope I get to do that again.
Okay.
I only got to do that for the regional level, for the state. So there was a group of students, and they're playing in an environment, and this differs from CCDC, from CyberForce, in that the different virtual environments are different in terms of what people have access to, right? Like they use something called NetLab Plus, which is it's like a web hypervisor, right? Where you're able to get into different instances. You see like a big network diagram of the environment, and you can click on it and open consoles to the different machines. And Red, you know, so what we did is you do work a little bit with the infrastructure team, and it is kind of a contribute what you can. And that's what a lot of these different red team things that I'm starting to understand is just, it's a contribute as you can, right?
Unfortunately, yeah.
I tried to contribute as much as I could, but I'm also taking 17 credit hours and working a full-time job. So I did what I could. And I was part of the web attack team. So what we did is, you know, we could propose like, hey, we would like to see this in the environment. And then you spend the day, basically, there's phases to your attack, right? So you spend the first bit, you're trying to actually gain a foothold in the systems. And then there are other teams that have specialized for like Windows and Linux and then firewall, right? So,
and you're talking red team here, right?
What?
You're talking red teamer with the specialties?
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Gotcha. Okay.
So and it kind of needs to be this way, because you're trying to give the students a more universal experience, right?
Nice.
And there is some communication that goes between red and blue. I didn't see that when I played. I guess that's something new that they've changed, or maybe it's something based on region. And that's another thing, right? Like different regions will have different ways of playing the game. It's usually sponsored out of some kind of college or some kind of university. For like the Midwest and Southeast, that's Moraine Valley Community College in Chicago. They have a grant for like some really large geospatial servers for things like that. So other companies and organizations will use Moraine Valley for different training activities and things like that. And I know that some of our friends from Argonne have been instructors at Moraine Valley before.
Cool.
So yeah, and really this is kind of and so Red, you spend the day trying to get into the systems, and then there are different phases for the contest, right? Like you get in, you establish persistence, and then start mucking about with things. You're trying to disable services. There's a scoring engine, which is a pretty typical piece I found for cyber games, is that checking if services are up or services are down. However, the difference with CCDC is that things stay legacy. And by that, I mean, if a lot of the things that you'll see from year to year may not change. If it's been successful in the past, it's going to stay there.
Interesting.
And certain colleges have better engagement with cybersecurity competition teams than others.
Unfortunately.
And they're DePaul, for instance, in the Midwest, in the Illinois region, they're the top competitor. Right, they're always on top of it, but that's also because their graduate students spend rotations helping the students, right? They'll develop playbooks and they'll develop institutional knowledge about things, which
Yeah.
honestly is kind of fair. You know, if you're in a corporation, you're going to do that, right? Like if I'm Walmart IT, I may have legacy playbooks of how we did things because I'm trying to outcompete Target.
Sure.
And Target may not have as good of IT as me, and maybe they haven't experienced the same things that I do. And we may be all using the same e-commerce platform because it's open source.
Sure.
And that's another thing that's in it, right? Like, so in the game, you're allowed to bring in tools. Red Team, it's a little different, right? You can get access to certain things. There's a individual named Rob Fuller.
Yeah. Rubik's. Yeah.
And he contributes a lot to the Red Team events for CCDC. And so there'll be different products that security products, pen test products that certain Red Teamers will have access to. Maybe they have contacts, maybe they have communication, and so you'll be able to leverage those. Okay. And then there are others where it's homegrown tools that you've built, or maybe something you found on the web, and it's really just a contribute as you can. Unfortunately, I'm probably not going to be able to contribute a whole lot to regionals coming up because I have exams, and I've tried to communicate that as effectively as I can. And so everybody seems fine with that, right? It's
your previous one, you competed in state, was it?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. As a blue teamer.
Okay. I'm talking about your recent red teaming.
This recent. So this was for southeast.
Southeast region as a red teamer.
Yeah, the southeast region. I didn't do it for the Midwest. And this kind of plays into this whole, like, how have I been able to red team while I'm in college when most students are going to be blue teaming? I've been very selective about what I do, and I haven't communicated a whole lot to my other students because I don't want to give anybody an unfair advantage.
Good.
And that's something I see a lot in these games is that people will take some knowledge and they'll run with it. It's like sports, right? If you have an advantage of you have a source or a line into things, you're going to tell them. So like my school competed in the Midwest and I competed red, and I flat out told them, like, hey, for the next month, I'm not talking to you.
Good.
I won't communicate to you. I won't say anything to you. We can talk about class, but if you start talking to me about anything to do with these cyber games, I'm done. I'm not talking to you.
Yeah, so you're saying you have a line of ethics, but some other schools, they might leverage sources they might know, unfortunately, because it's competitive, right?
Yeah, I'm sure they do. I like to think that everybody probably tries to play by those ethical rules, but Candy, I view things a little differently.
Sure.
And maybe that's because of the industry that I work in. But I take my word seriously. I take my ethics seriously, and awesome. I think you kind of have to for these red teaming things, especially when. What I've seen is the parallel between CyberForce and CCDC in that red teaming aspect is that ethics component, right? Okay. We don't want people here that are rude. We don't want people here. They didn't want people there that or say they're going to do things and then don't do anything at all, or just take the competition as an advantage, right?
Yeah.
We're not, and that's kind of it with CCDC too. Like this is for collegiate students. This might be the one and only time that these students are ever going to actually face a cyber attack.
Yeah.
Before they reach the real world, or if ever, and that's unfortunate too. But that's the nature of it. The industry is hyper competitive, and the games are hyper competitive. So you kind of need to adopt that mindset. And one of the nice mindsets that I've seen from it. And this is now me speaking as blue, but also speaking as red, is that a lot of people tend to stay in their own groups. And I don't like to do that.
Nice.
Whenever I played as a blue, we would actually go to Moraine Valley and I would go sit at the lunch table with the top competitive teams and I would talk to them.
Nice.
And I knew that they probably wouldn't tell me anything, but I wanted to. And if I saw another team, I would go talk to them and ask them, hey, how did you solve this? How did you solve that? How did you do this? How did you do that? and I'll do that with red too. And the reason
Nice.
that I was doing that is, again, I'm thinking about what's beyond the game. And what's
Nice.
beyond the game is industry.
Mhm.
And in the industry, we're not playing a game. Well, we are, but it's a game with higher stakes.
Mhm.
And that game with higher stakes comes with a different way that you need to engage in things. And that's what these games have taught me. That's what Red had taught me at CyberForce, and that's what Red taught me at CCDC, is that you need to be able to communicate with your team, be able to be okay with not knowing things,
Good.
and be okay to Google everything.
Uh-huh.
And really, I found that the Red CCDC was fantastic. I hope I can do it again.
Uh-huh.
It seemed that there was a lot of like, let's try really hard to give the students a universal experience.
Good.
Now, the students also have access to chat with Red Team. So, if you start trash talking Red Team, somebody's going to go and deface your website and drop malware on your systems.
Uh,
So there's that. But it was a friendly contest, right? Like
Good.
like there wasn't a whole bad words or things like that. It was more just
Uh-huh.
like, oh, I see you haven't touched my systems at all. Guess my security's too good. It's like, we'll
Nice.
see about that. So there's definitely that. And
Okay.
one of the things that is different about CCDC, and I'm kind of being a little guarded about it, is that there's this whole idea of let's not share too much,
Sure.
because um, there's because it's so competitive, because
Uh-huh.
some schools funding come with that. uh, Red is not as open to sharing tactics and
Mhm.
open to sharing how exploits were achieved. um, and
Uh,
and there's not as much communication about infrastructure.
okay.
And unfortunately, that's the nature of the contest, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
Because they're like, the school that I go to, right, our funding for our ability to play in games is based in the school's eyes on how well we place in the game. And
Okay.
it's like that for other universities too.
Uh,
Because a lot of these teams, most of them are just student run organizations. Now you will see some schools like University of Central Florida and Dakota State and DePaul, where their student organizations are actually run more like sports teams.
wow.
And that, I think, is really, and this is just kind of off topic here, but
Mhm.
that's kind of where I would like to see the cybersecurity education go.
Okay.
I think there needs to be more of an emphasis on the games, and the classes need to prepare you for the games. You need to understand the theory, but you also
Okay.
need to understand some hands-on applications.
Mhm.
So there are some schools, like SIUC, that a friend of mine went to. They actually have it in their program where you competing on the team is actually class credit. You actually can take that as a class, and I think that's incredible.
Mhm.
And they will do that either if you do either red or blue.
Okay.
So if you volunteer for red, you get some class credit. If you play for blue, you get that class credit. And I think that's really, really important. And that's kind of where I see this going. Now, the other thing, it was all virtual, just like CyberForce.
Yeah.
And
Last year.
it was incredible to see that, despite the challenges, people were, we were using voice chat, through
Nice.
Discord. There was communication going on in chat platforms. Um, and that was really cool.
Okay.
I definitely see, at least I hope, that the academic industry, I call it an industry because it is, um, gets this idea in their head that programming contests, cybersecurity contests,
Mhm.
this is how you get good programmers. This is
Sure.
how you get good security practitioners,
Yeah.
because they have to do it hands-on, right? Like when I was blue, at my community college, we would actually have preset drill times. right?
Wow.
Where we would have to go spin up virtual machines. We would have to network them together. We would have to install services and get them done. And our coaches would time us. And then they would give
Wow.
us injects, and then they would time us so that we could get them done, because that's what you do in the game.
Mhm.
And now red, it's a little more free form, right? Like everybody that's there is probably just, most of them are just like me. You know, they're working, they're doing this for fun. Some of them, you know, you can get that continuing education credit for your cert. So that's also a reason why a lot of people do it too, is to keep your certs current. But
Yeah.
yeah, you know, that experience of like being on the other side of the fence, really was, the blinders have fully come off because of CyberForce, but now they are wrenched away completely. Like,
Lovely.
when you start out with this, you think that the red team are
Magic.
these gods. You know,
Yeah.
they are just these all-powerful beings that they are going to smite you, and they're going to be able to get in. They're going to drop O-days and all of that.
Yeah.
No. It might be like that for the nationals and beyond, but like at these entry level areas, no. There is some kind of attack plan.
Yeah.
There is, I will say that CyberForce was, it was more concrete in that idea of an APT,
Yes.
where CCDC is more that idea of a hacking group got into these systems, we took over their tools, and now we have access to your systems.
Okay.
So that, those were the two different mindsets, right? Like,
Yeah.
one is very like communication wise, and I could definitely see that the difference there from being a blue in CCDC and being a red in CyberForce and now being a red in CCDC. This whole chat that we did last year for CyberForce, I have students that go to the university that I go with, and they said that they hope that their university will let them do CyberForce again,
There you go.
because that chat,
Huge,
I
right?
had a student that was sitting there, you know, I could see the water glistening in their eyes,
Yeah,
where
me
they were
too.
like, that was the first time that I actually got a chance to learn.
Exactly.
And
That's yeah.
and CCDC does that too.
But
It's
differently, right?
more, what?
It does it, but it does it in different mechanisms, I would say.
Right,
In
right.
a
The
competitive.
mechanism, the pedagogy, or whatever that word is when we're talking
Yeah.
about learning, is more self-driven.
Exactly.
And I think that
Self-discovery.
that's, and for somebody like me, I thrive on that. But
Sure.
I've seen other students where they do not thrive on that. And it
Exactly.
turns them off to the whole idea that they cannot do this. And I think, and CCDC has done a good job of it. Years ago, it didn't, where you kind of got this idea in your head that this is how it's done, right? Like, and it led to some poor choices. And if we find, and that's the thing, like as a blue, you try to game the game, you try to play the game to game the scoring engine, right?
Exactly.
Like
To win,
if
right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
If the
that's why.
website goes down, just throw a website back up there. But now they've started changing things where it's like, okay, Red, if you detect that they have modified the website, even though it's scoring, but you can't log in and buy a product,
Nice.
we're taking points away from them.
That's great. Happy to hear that.
And that was fantastic, because in previous years as blue, no, it wasn't like that. It was more like, oh, the website's down. Okay, cool. Let's throw up an example.html page with like, you know, my end, you know, whatever the string the scoring engine is looking for. And now we've got our points back.
Yeah. Unfortunately, older versions of CyberForce, they also had that problem as well. So, yeah.
And I think that's something that a lot of these cyber games, I think that the cyber gaming community, I think is growing. I think that there's, especially in the academic space, and I hope it continues to grow, because Had I not done CCDC as a blue, I never would have done CyberForce as a red. I had an amazing instructor. Her name was Kylie Williams, and Kylie pushed me to join red for CyberForce. She was like, "You're not playing with us this year," and I'm like, "Well, why?" And she's like, "Because you need to go do this."
Huh.
And that was incredible. And if I hadn't had that instructor that did that and pushed me to do that, I wouldn't be thinking about what am I going to do when I'm a full-time worker. And as a full-time worker, I want to keep volunteering. You know, I'm not so good at some other types of volunteership. I'm no runner. I'm no, marathon runner, but if I can continue contributing to the students, that's important. Like, yeah, maybe I wasn't as advanced in some of my exploits and what I accomplished, but again, I walked in there, I was like, I'm so nervous, I'm gonna screw this up, but in the end, I was like, all right, let's see what I can help with. And I think as a red teamer, that's the mindset that I need to continue as. What can I help with? How can I help you? How can I automate what you're trying to do? How can I add some level of help to the exercise? And that's what I took away from it. What I would recommend for others is if you see the opportunity to volunteer for Red Team, for CCDC, do it. They are always wanting and needing people of all skill sets. And yeah, there were people of all skill sets there. There were a lot of people that were more advanced than I was. There was an individual where I have no idea how she did it, but she was able to backdoor everybody's firewall. And so she just lingered there and was able, when teams were misbehaving, she would just shut all their networking access off, right? But how was she able to do that? Well, there were default settings that were left wide open on these systems. And that's really what it was. There was default settings that were left wide open. Kill chain wise, CyberForce, I think we had a little more advanced. We had more advanced cyber kill chains.
Yeah.
But I think that's speaking to what is the goal of the accomplishment of the game?
Exactly.
People don't play CCDC the right way.
Unfortunately.
And now that I'm red, I see that. They spend all this time like, oh, we got to keep the services up. We got to keep red out. That's not the point. The point is for you to answer those business injects. The point is for you to work as a business team.
Yeah.
And so if you're able to respond to it and you're like, I cannot accomplish this work for you. This is what I can do. We are under attack. Please provide more funding to our department. I recommend that we take ourselves offline in order to patch the systems. The students that responded with that scored high in the game. The students that focus all on services and don't answer any injects, yeah, they place high and they move on, but not as much as the ones that spend the time to answer these business requests. And I think that's the mindset that you need to take away from these things. When you play these games, you're playing them to learn to be a worker. And when you're a worker and your boss says, hey, what's my password complexity policy on all these systems?
Yeah.
You need to maybe think about, drop whatever you're doing to try to fix the website and respond to the boss's request. If they're asking for you to implement a firewall policy and you're too busy trying to redesign the website to game a scoring engine, or because you're like, this will be a cool feature, you're not responding to what the boss wants. And that's the big takeaway from me for Blue from CCDC is there is a level of prioritization that you need to have as a worker. And sometimes things that you think are meaningful are not. Is it worth your time to find everybody who's SSH'd into your environment and shut them off? Or is it better to take the time to fill out an incident response so that you can pass it to your boss so that the next time this happens, they're going to be able to figure it out? Because in the end, you're all in virtual machines, right?
Mhm.
Most of your corporations are going to be in virtual machines too. And a virtual machine is very different than a physical machine. We can delete that asset. If we have set up policies where that asset is so important that we cannot delete it, then that's something that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And that's that mindset, right? So what I'm really taking away from it is that there are attack perspective. Let's talk about that, right? CCDC is more like, what does a script kiddie do? What does a semi-organized gang do?
Mhm.
And how do they accomplish it, right? So there are different tiers, right? There's people like me that are going on Google, finding some exploit and dropping it in there,
Sure.
or like the boss guy says, hey, or girl. I didn't really know anybody's names. We all kind of chatted through handles and things like that, and that was kind of impersonal.
Yeah.
CyberForce, we're more personal. We have to put in your name so I know who
Exactly.
you are.
Yeah.
um, and I think part of that is also because people are working in industry for CCD. I have no idea. Some of them are probably even professors at some of these universities,
Sure.
right? So there's that, where at CCDC, yeah, it's more tiered, right? There
Sure.
are there are high level operators that are running like the command and control infrastructure to drop like beacons and things like that, to get
Yeah.
callbacks to some things like Merlin and Gandalf, which were these
C2s.
C2 frameworks that I had no idea about, but they
Mhm.
sounded so cool.
Yeah.
So now I'm learning about them. And then there are people, that are like me on the web exploit team, where it's like, yeah, we're trying to find a foothold into the environment. We kind of have some general idea of what these are because we've seen it before. Go ahead and drop this shell in here, try to drop additional shells, so that we misdirect and so that people don't know that we're there. If you get
Mhm.
into a system, linger and persist, i.e., don't kill your SSH session just
Mhm.
because you got in. There are
Uh,
a lot of times that if you create an interactive shell to such complexity, somebody may kill your initial shell, but you need to have a way to get back in.
yeah.
Um, and so starting to think in that more multi-dimensional space of not just break in to face the website, break in, shut the service down. Okay, break in, establish a way to get back in,
Mhm.
disrupt the service in such a way that it's hard for them to recover, but not so bad that they can't fully recover it because they're students.
Yeah, exactly.
And then, just linger and try to help as best you can. So that's CCDC. CyberForce is more, at least what it's evolving into, I think,
Mhm.
is more structured APT activities.
Exactly.
So CCDC, it's kind of more your common criminal, right?
Yeah.
You're going to find, the new VMware exploit drops. All right, cool. Somebody's going to go package that up with another exploit that they find. They're going to go do a Shodan query. And they're going to start firing it off on all the systems they found. They probably watched some video about how to proxy it.
Yeah.
So that's CCDC. CyberForce
Mhm.
is more like your supply chain might be compromised.
Exactly.
We've got into your system and we're there and we're persisting, and the whole walking blue through the exploit, I think, is more beneficial. But I can
Yes.
definitely see why a lot of schools play the CCDC game. And I think this also speaks to the generational differences that I've noticed. A lot of these coaches are people who grew up in IT. And by
Yeah.
grew up, I mean they started in the 80s or the
Yes.
70s.
Yep.
And they see these games as this is what we were always waiting for. This is it. This is why I'm an educator. And I hope that continues. I think the pandemic has definitely showed everybody that there is a viable home in academia for competitive cyber competitions.
Mhm.
And for me, had I never done this, I would never have this job. I would never have these opportunities. I would not be talking to you, Candy,
That's true.
if I did not start as a blue teamer,
Uh-huh.
and now I've evolved, into a red teamer. But yeah, I think that on the whole, what I would like to see is I'd like to do it again if I get the time. And it's definitely something that I'm going to continue doing, is trying to contribute my time.
Yeah.
I see that this volunteering and this red teaming is a more open source than people think. Like this idea that there is this common framework and we can all contribute to it and grow it.
Okay.
I see that as what these cyber games are, right?
Okay. Gotcha.
CCDC and CyberForce, we kind of follow that same methodology, right? Like all the games do, red and blue. You have a scoring engine. You have services that you need to keep up. Red tries to break in and take them. And so you can almost see CyberForce as a fork of CCDC, right?
Yes.
You've taken what CCDC has, and now you've changed it into something not that's a little more unrecognizable. And CCDC taking that idea of like a Capture the Hill game,
exactly,
and has refactored it into this red versus blue, right? So and I think it's important. And I think it's important that schools continue doing this, students continue doing this, and for people in the industry, go volunteer. Hey man, I didn't get a lot of great exploits. I got to deface a website, so that was cool. I got to help somebody with a Pickle Rick defacement. Cool. I mean, I didn't actually get to do the defacement. I just was really simple. I just changed their websites around to be like, red team needs money, pay money, like stuff like that.
Sure.
But I made sure that I took a backup of the student's website and I put it in a directory, right?
Cool.
So if you ran a find command, you would be able to locate it.
Was everyone on the red supposed to do that? What you just did?
Yeah. So that's another thing, is that there are ground rules that are clearly communicated to you.
Good.
Not unlike CyberForce, right? Like at CyberForce, it is clearly communicated to you that, hey, follow this playbook, and if you have the ability to do an exploit, do it, but make sure the students can get their services back up.
Exactly.
And CCDC is the same way. It's like, hey, we're going to break in and try to exploit these things, but if you do, make sure that it's recoverable for the student. I think that there's a little less structure to CCDC.
Sure.
But I think that's probably indicative of the state level. Okay. I've heard regionals, and what I'm looking at for what they're doing for regionals seems to be far more structured.
Okay.
But I think that most schools never get beyond the state level.
Sure.
So I think that's the difference, right? Is that you're trying to just see, can people survive regionals? Can people survive to the national level? Because it's stressful, right? Like
heck yeah.
These things are extremely stressful, and people don't think about that, right? Like that the level of stress that somebody is doing with this, I would equivalent it to what you do in a sporting event.
Yeah.
You are wiped afterwards. You are burned out. You don't want to use computers at all. But you just have to keep pushing. And, at CCDC, there's definitely the whole clear cut. Here's what you can do. Here's what you can't do. What I would like to see for all the games that I've done is a document that I sign before I play. Okay. Because there's kind of a gentleman's, there's kind of that agreement among friends.
Yeah.
Yeah, good sportsmanship.
And I'm really big about having that for CyberForce competitions and previous in-person ones. You did have a physical form that you signed out. But in terms of sort of that principle being published from top on down, it varied in prior years, but in
Mhm.
last year, 2020, I was really big in terms of making
Yeah,
those
you were.
sportsmanship very clear. Yeah, standards. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's what I've had to learn. And I think that as a red teamer, that's something that, because hopefully that's what I do in the future,
You're
beyond
good. You're
being,
good with that. So
is you're not doing this. This isn't cyber warfare.
mhm.
You are not red teaming to disrupt service. You are red teaming to educate. And that is what red teaming is. You are, and so there was also that part of it with CCDC too. CyberForce was a little more so the whole reporting.
Okay.
It was stressed how important it was to put down what you did
Exactly.
to
Critical.
attack.
Yeah.
And in an industry, I see that too. At least I think I do. Can maybe you can speak to that more, where it's like writing reports ends up being what a pen tester job actually is.
Yes, and from my experience in industry, the quality varies quite a bit, unfortunately, right? With the better people having a better form of documentation and also communicating that documentation and finding to the customer. So unfortunately, in industry, it does vary in terms of you have some that are I would say very much automated template with very low value content, unfortunately, where it's a lot of boilerplate stuff and sort of equivalent to a Nessus scan at best. And then that, unfortunately, is the ultimate results for an assessment. And in those cases, I really frown on those, unfortunately. But unfortunately, they're still common in industry. So yeah.
Yeah, and so we had to. The rule at CCDC was that you had to publish what you did, and then if a blue teamer in an incident response publishes that, and they were able to attribute it to your IP and what red teamer did it,
Uh-huh.
you then go to jail.
Ah, nice. It does.
So
And
so
do the
so
white team resolve that in terms of
yeah,
the
yeah.
okay, yeah. Okay,
Yeah, the
gotcha.
white team resolves that, where it's like, all right, now you have to sit out for a couple hours. You got caught.
Oh
um
why?
and and in previous years, if because everybody was usually in person,
Uh,
so that's another piece, right? A lot of it is both remote and in person, and I think that didn't produce the same level of experience, because I've done both, where I did it
uh,
remote and then I also went to Moraine Valley.
okay.
When I did it remote, I went to from my community college. I went to our sister university, SIUC, and we played there. So SIUC would play in a room up above. We would play in a room below. There would be a representative, usually a faculty member, that agrees that they will be the moderator, right? So there's
Yeah,
no collusion between the two blue teams,
good.
um, which is unfortunate. I think in Southeast, I think they did it differently. I think Blue had a open Slack that was going on between them so that they could
Mhm.
communicate.
Yeah,
But and so there would be red team in a room, and it was like, if you could find out who did it, you could go tell them. And there was that whole camaraderie of like, somebody would slip a note under red team's door that's like, hey, will you fix our services if we give you cookies? And
oh
red team
yikes.
would agree, right? And so somebody
Yeah.
would have to go rush around to the lunch tables and like try to grab as many cookies as they can and bring them back, right?
Oh
But
goodness.
translate that to the industry, right?
uh
Um, Somebody has your systems under siege.
yeah,
Hey man, for 15 Bitcoin, I'll put your services back in place for you, and I'll tell you how I did it.
sure.
I'm sure that happens. I don't know. I haven't ever experienced it, but so there's a real world dimensionality to it, but there's a fun dimensionality to it,
That's
and
what how I would describe it. Those are just sort of fun game elements that sort of is just like out of the ordinary and sort of spices up a little bit with those other
yeah,
factors. Yeah,
yeah,
fun
and so,
elements.
so I had a good time. I would definitely do it again. but I am seeing that there is a difference between CCDC and CyberForce, whereas CCDC also has like the white team and things like that, I
Uh,
think are more volunteers.
oh, interesting.
At least that's the way I understand it. I don't know specifically. I'm not privy to all of that.
Yikes.
Um, but you know, Rob Fuller did make an appearance in our Slack group, and was like, "Hey, you know, I'm just checking in on the different red teams, you know, around the
Cool.
country.
Wow.
Here's some ideas of things that we could do." And I think he does like the main red teaming for like
The
at the
Nationals.
national level.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no, and that was cool. You know, there was, at least in our group, there wasn't a whole lot of peacocking.
That's good to
There wasn't
hear.
a whole, yeah, there wasn't a whole lot of people that were like, "Oh yeah, I'm the best." Da, 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 da. But then again, all of us were also like all of us all worked full time, even our
Uh,
lead. So like, and the lead, you know, he was like, "Hey, I have a doctor's appointment the day of the contest. I'll be back in 2 hours." It
wow.
was no big deal, you
Cool.
know. Now I don't know if that's different from previous years, but there's definitely a very laid back quality to it. And
Mhm.
what I've noticed with all of this, and even in my professional um, life, is I need to relax.
Oh, totally.
I have definitely found myself not taking the lessons that I've learned from the cyber games into the real world,
Okay.
and which is like, relax. You got to have fun with it. You got to have
There
a good
you go.
you know, because I've definitely been on priority projects and engineering events at my job that I won't discuss, but
Sure.
I'll talk about the emotion at least. I think I could talk about that.
Sure.
Uh, you know, where it was like I was just way too intense about
Yes.
this work. You know, I'm
Yeah.
like, this has to be done. This has to be done now.
I'm the
And
same
like, I'm not
way.
communicating that. Like, I'm
Yeah.
just more like very monotone in all the discussions. Like, I don't
But
know, I
in
can't
your
do.
head though, right?
Yeah, yeah. And then like your boss comes and talks to you and he's like, "Hey Dave, you know, I'm really glad that you took such initiative with this, but it's
Uh-huh.
actually not as critical as you think it is."
Ah,
And
fair enough.
it's like, oh, like, you know, so there's that, right? And I
But
think,
I would say it would go both ways though, because I think you and I we have similar personalities of being like we want to get it done, we want to do it to the best possible, right? And we want to make sure that we have everything we need, and everything's gonna be a success. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, unfortunately. So I think you and I we share that similar trait. But then I would also push back in some of the other people where I see they're a little too lackadaisical, right? A little too chill and relax. And for the CyberForce competition, the way I kind of see the red team is like you have this really important responsibility to educate the blue team. So you know how you shared about how you did all those prep practice when you were a blue team on CCDT, right? Like time, like drills, right? And I feel like for what we're trying to do for the CyberForce competition, we probably need to do something like that because what we're emulating is APT adversaries. And to do a good job of emulating APT adversaries, it's not like, oh, I'm just gonna stroll up and like, oh, hey, just take it chill. No, you have to drill and really have your information
yeah,
solid and be able to communicate to the blue team because again, we have the chat in CyberForce, so it's a little different. And so I would say for us, we need to chill, but for some other people, they need to sort of up their game or take it a little more seriously. Get a little more skin in the game. So that's
yeah,
what I would throw out there.
absolutely. And I think that speaks to what I've realized now about CCDC, where it's not actually about red team.
Yes.
It's not actually about defending from red team. It's about answering your business injects, because
Yeah.
that's the highest part of your score. And then if you can keep your services up, you'll do well. But
Yeah.
responding to your business work is important. And I think that's the lesson that I took away from it, is that
Cool.
it's all well and good to have all this nice automation and all of this fancy stuff, but at the end of the day, if you're spending if it's something that would take you 30 minutes to do by hand and you spend 5 hours, 2 hours building the automation, why didn't you just do it 30 minutes by hand?
Yeah.
And 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 yeah, that whole and what you were talking about there about the difference in the APT to CCDC.
Uh-huh.
CCDC is more the random attackers on the internet trying to break
Exactly.
into your system.
Sure. Yeah.
CCD CyberForce is more like, you know, oh, this country is running power plants or oil
Totally.
rigs. We need to decimate them
Yeah.
because there's some kind of economic interest we have in that, or maybe some military objective that we have.
Yeah, we're gonna backdoor your solar winds, right? And then we're gonna
Right.
use your solar winds installation to do what I have to do against your ICS systems. So that's what we're trying to do with CyberForce.
Yeah, and I think that's the big takeaway is that CCDC is more what you might see in a small, medium size, maybe large business on that day to day, right? This is an extreme case, right? Where it's like somebody's able to, do a SQL injection on your website. And now they're decimating your email server and all of that. But I mean, if you don't have to report your incident, you probably aren't reporting your incident. Or if your incident is reported, there are different ways that you do it that usually don't have as much public disclosure. So that I understand. That's the piece. But yeah, you're absolutely right about there's more structure to CyberForce, and I think there has to be.
Yeah.
And that's honestly, I like. I guess what I'm trying to say is coming from CCDC to CyberForce, if people can do both, I think you get the best of both worlds, right?
Exactly.
I think CCDC needs to remain the way that it is.
I totally agree.
Because people need to have a place where, because the truth is, the people that are exposed to these games and the people that are the ones that go and then want to study and practice and learn on their own, like maybe they sign up for Try and Hack Me after the game.
Sure.
And they spend, they spend whatever free time they might have after video games and movies, playing a cyber game. Those are the kind of workers that I want.
Yes.
At least working with me.
Yeah.
The people that go to the game and they have the meltdown and then they don't want to do it anymore. Those are the people that probably are not ready for this industry. People that melt down
yes
and then
and no.
freak out.
It's complicated. Yeah, in
Yeah.
terms. So I would sort of add some more caveats in terms of if they have to do with the front lines of putting out the fire, right? That high stress kind of, we have to incident response and hunt the red team and like patch what they took down. Yeah, that aspect of cybersecurity isn't for them. But the way I see cybersecurity is like this really big. There's so many different jobs. And so people who aren't good at that like high stress environment, I feel, and that's what I'm trying to tailor CyberForce. And that's why I think both competitions are good. I think CCDC is a good competition. I think CyberForce is also a good competition, but they have two completely different goals. Like you're saying, there was a fork for CyberForce, a GitHub fork. And what we're trying to do with CyberForce is more about learning with the chat scoring and walking through the blue teams about understanding exploitations and how to mitigate, right? So I think we're really tailoring it more towards a learning experience for beginners to intermediates. And I feel for the CyberForce competition, it's like you throw you into the deep end and it's competition. You're competing, right? And there's less information and, it's sort of that more of that Wild West kind of environment, which also you learn some really important lessons, but it's a completely different competition, right? Completely different games. So that's why I see it as like they're separate things. They're both good, and you learn different lessons and you get different things out of them. And also, they appeal to different audiences too. So that's how I would sort of summarize the two different competitions.
I would definitely agree with that. I think that there's benefits to be had for both of them, but I'm really liking that contrast, and I hope other people see that contrast too. That you need, I think, when you're learning as a student, I think you need to be exposed to both. I think you need to be exposed to the high stress, high stakes, wild, wild west of the CCDC.
Exactly.
And I think you also need to be exposed to the, okay, what happens when you face an adversary that isn't your average average attacker?
Yes.
What happens when you face an adversary that's an APT? And in this case, you know, what happens when you're at a company and you get audited?
Mhm.
And that's almost what I see CyberForce is like, because if you're going to audit someone, you're going to want to perform as an APT. You're going to want to perform in such a way that you have a structured attack. You have a method to communicate to the blue
Yes.
about what's going on, because most pen tests, you're not just going to, like in CCDC, I'm just going to fire everything off and then I'm never going to talk to you again, you know.
Yeah.
In a company situation, you're going to have the pen test, or you'll have the incident, and then you need to spend a good long time chatting and communicating with the auditor.
Yes.
Or you're chatting and communicating with your internal team to figure out what happened, right?
Exactly.
So yeah, I think you're right about this whole, there are different objectives, and
Totally. Both for
what are
good.
you trying to accomplish? Yeah.
Yeah. Like you're saying, with CyberForce, it's like, okay, an incident happened, freeze, right? So red is kind of like on pause, and then now more of an auditing mode, and then they're like, you know, chatting back and forth with blue. Is like, hey, blue, what happened here? You know, there was an incident. Let's go through this, right? So that's CyberForce. With CCDC, you know, the hack happened, and it's constantly hacks are happening, right? And so there's no pausing in CCD, right? It's just okay, hack. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know which one's, I don't think either one is better.
Yeah.
There
Totally.
are merits to both.
Totally.
And I think that I want to see them both continue to evolve.
Mhm.
I think that there's a lot of lessons that I've taken away from both of these events that I want to carry into my professional world. And I definitely will. And I think that people starting out that want to be engineers in security, want to be incident response handlers, the whole gambit, right? These are the places to find what's your skill. What are you good at, right? I found that I'm good at the Linux command line, or at least I think I might be. I don't know. Sometimes I'm better than others. But most days I'm just terrible and I'm just Googling everything, right? So, but and
That's
that's
how you get
not
better.
me. Yeah, that's not me, you know, digging at me. That's me being honest, is that I literally Google everything I do. And
Me too.
and you know, it might be a command that I have run 100 times, you know, like grepping for a file, right? And that's something that I did as a red teamer, and something that I do as a blue, that I would do as a blue teamer, running a find string, right? These simple system admin tasks that you do mean something. There's your introductory computing course where you learned the CLI. You know, unfortunately, I don't think enough schools have classes like that.
Yeah, I want to jump in with a really crazy hot take, and it kind of loops back to what you said initially about the skills of system administration, and then more of the cybersecurity stuff. My belief is that to be good at cybersecurity, it's just really good understanding of system administration, network administration, operating systems, programming, software administrations. If you get really good at those basic, more of sort of dev and making sure systems work, that actually makes you a much better cybersecurity person. That's my belief, you know, period. And I think, unfortunately, one of the bad trends in the industry is sometimes they kind of focus more too much on, oh, these are just special cybersecurity topics, and you just learn how to use Nmap, Metasploit, run Nessus, and now you're a really good cybersecurity person. It's like, no. And that's why through our learning group things videos that we've been doing, that's one of the biggest richest things that we're showing is just basic netstat commands, system administration commands, how to get information from the system so you understand what's actually going on. And so that's what I feel is like the backbone foundation that really makes good cybersecurity people. And that's something that I'm hoping to sort of emphasize more and communicate more clearly with the CyberForce competitions for blue teamers who want to compete, to make it very clear to them. It's like, oh, it's not, oh, what's the argument for Nmap? Then you get a million inputs. Like, oh, now what do I do with these million inputs with Nmap? It's like, do you know the difference between UDP and TCP? It's like, no. Like, wait a minute, we have to. You don't need Nmap you need basic networking stuff first, or basic operating system first. That's what really makes you a good cybersecurity person. A rant over.
Yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah.
Let's, gosh, even thinking about the games, right? What did I get selected to do as blue? I got selected to do Linux. Why? Because I was with this group of friends at the community college, and that culture is still there, where it was, oh, Linux, this is cool. Let's install that as our personal operating system, and now try to see what we can do. Do everything that we would do in Windows. Let's do it in Linux.
That's the best way to learn.
Yeah, and that's the ritual that everybody who joined the Linux team had to do. You had to install Arch from scratch. You had to that was kind of the initiation, right? And the Windows people, right? Like what they would do at the community college. And SIUC did this too, and McKendree, the university that I go to, has done this too. You make an agreement that in Windows you will do everything either through the run prompt or through CMD.
Nice. Perfect. I love it.
You need to open Word to do your class. All right, dude. You do the CMD, but then you hold each other accountable. Yeah. So that's the whole like experience from Blue. And I look back on the community college as like, wow, that was so much fun. But that was also because it was a center of academic excellence. That was the culture that was fostered there by the professors, which was like, oh my gosh, there was a her name was Jessa. She was our firewall admin. Jessa had a kid and she worked a job, but she was dedicated to the firewall. She would carry a Palo Alto physical firewall with her from her home to school. And then between breaks, she would be in the CLI or in the web GUI trying to do cool things.
That's awesome.
But that's also because if you wanted to play, you had to train.
Good. Thank you.
And,
I love it.
And that's what the CCDC, at least the teams that I see that do well, that's what they've done. Now, that's not to say that there aren't. I did hear about a person who competed this year and last year where it was either just one of them or two of them that were playing the game and they scored high.
Interesting. And unfortunately, I think that happens in CyberForce too. And this is the interesting thing that we really found out about it in the 2020 competition for CyberForce, because in 2020 CyberForce Online Edition, because of COVID, everyone had to play as your own person. So there was, you have to play as an individual. And then what we found was that there was way more beginner students than what we saw in prior competitions. So the conclusion there was that each team in prior CyberForce competition, they had one or two all-stars that was sort of doing all the heavy lifting. And then you had a lot of other beginners that were just doing the miscellaneous, but it's those all-stars that really carried the team. And so that's why I really like the 2020 competition of the CyberForce Online Edition with individuals, because now the individuals are responsible and had to learn themselves. So I think that process is such more beneficial for each of the students. So I'm hoping, this year for CyberForce, it's probably going to go back to some type of team, is my guess, but hopefully we'll be able to separate them so as individuals we can test them, and maybe those can be bonus points, and just give them that sort of like, hey, you're on the keyboard, you're responsible, versus having your LeBron James and your Curry making all the shots, right? It's like no, right. You're gonna have to go to the free throw, right? So
yeah. And here's a brief rant about about both competitions, the
Sure.
cybersecurity competition industry as a whole.
Uh-huh.
I am. This is no fault of the organizers. This is no fault of anybody who puts the teams together.
Uh-huh.
But man, there is really a lack of marketing for these things. Like,
True.
and by that I mean, I don't understand why everybody who's in my cybersecurity major isn't going and playing these games. I don't know why everybody who's a computer science major isn't at least playing one game or going and doing a programming contest. I don't understand. And I don't know if it's just a lack of marketing or if it's a plethora of distractions, or maybe it's because I'm the oddball who's not on Facebook or any social media platform because, man, I can't handle it. But I don't know, but there's not enough people doing it is what I guess I'm getting at, right? Like I would much rather. I think that, my skills when I started out, I rocketed into some really cool positions, but if there were more people doing this, I don't think I ever would have gotten here, right? Like, and that's not to say that I'm not unhappy. I'm just more like, wow, why, what do both CCDC and CyberForce, like what does it need to do to get more of that engagement, right? Like
Mhm.
what needs to be done, because like I wouldn't have this job if I didn't play CCDC and CyberForce. I put that on my resume and they're like, yeah, you rose to the top of the candidate pool. Like
Nice.
I've gotten multiple offers for jobs
Yeah.
because I did that. But
Uh,
that's also because I go to cybersecurity conferences, right? Like I'm like, yeah, let me go drop some money at a local B-sides, like yeah,
nice.
I'll, like, but I had to go find that. There
True.
was nobody at my school that was like, yo, Dave, go to B-sides.
Uh-huh.
Dave, go to Show Me Con here in St. Louis.
Yeah.
Dave, if you've got the money, go to DEF CON or go to
Okay.
an online RSA's free this year. Go.
Yeah.
Or Dave, you should go play CCDC. Like it was because I went to that Center of Academic Excellence that they
Uh-huh.
like really pushed like you must compete in the game. Like the game is everything for your education. And they were totally right.
Mhm.
Oh, 100% they were right.
Mhm.
And my universities started doing that, but there's just like we had people who joined our games at the community college and at the university. Like we had a guy who was running firewall who was a chemistry major who
Sure.
graduated with like a degree in biochem and chemistry, right?
Nice.
We've had people be our project managers who were psychology majors, right?
Uh-huh.
I've had people go and do that, but
Uh-huh.
it's all word of mouth, right? It's like
Ah.
somebody at a party or somebody at a fair, they were like, oh yeah, cool, check this out, man, like we fished the whole school, you want to join, like,
Uh-huh.
or like showing lock picking and stuff like that, and somebody's like, ooh, that looks cool, but
Uh-huh.
I wish that more people would come and do it, and that's what I hope in the future is there's more marketing.
Yeah.
And maybe that's something that I need to think about once I'm done with school. Like
So
how do I
I
give back?
yeah, and I think you're giving back with, doing our learning group videos. And I think, with these kind of videos that we're doing, these can be the starts of sort of educating and sort of, pushing out awareness about these competitions. So, I think, in a roundabout way, we're sort of doing right now. So, we'll see how that goes. Because, yeah, I ran into the same problem with recruiting for the CyberForce competition. And I saw year to year, the volunteer participation was very mixed in terms of sometimes we get more, then unfortunately sometimes people don't come back. And unfortunately, I didn't have opportunities to sort of chat with them to find out, hey, why aren't you back? You know, we sort of really like you to be involved and volunteer more, right? So, you know, I hopefully I can chat and sort of get some of that data. And I think a big part of it though is just finding avenues of advertising, and maybe we make these kind of videos to explain what is it about. We'll get more people interested in knowing what it actually is.
Oh, totally. But
Yeah.
I definitely know that, like, but in the industry,
Uh-huh.
these sort of events are known. Like
That's true.
my company knows about CyberForce. They're like,
Yeah.
oh, cool, you do that? Yeah, I've heard about that. That's a cool one.
Uh-huh.
Um, you know, they've heard about CCDC, but
Yeah.
the outside isn't. You know, like my I remember the first time that I told one of my computing professors, I was like, hey man, I'm gonna be red teaming for this Department of Energy game for the next couple days.
Uh-huh.
I'm not going to be in class because my school gave me they would give like the academic waivers just like for sports teams for us to go.
Ah, neat.
It turns out a lot of schools actually do that,
Cool.
especially the more developed programs like Iowa, and and a couple of those other universities. So there was that, but you know, yeah, hopefully the reach out gets there, because I see myself now after playing in these games that this volunteering, um, this is how I can continue hacking, even while I'm developing software code. You know, I may not, and that's okay. You know, that's okay if I never get to be on the front lines of running an actual hack or something like that. That's okay.
Yes.
That there's my place in the industry,
Yes.
and I'm doing it.
Lovely.
And I think that I wouldn't have that mentality if it wasn't for CCDC and it wasn't for CyberForce. I can't stress enough. I've said it over and over, but
Yeah.
everybody who is going through this journey, whether you're in academics, especially if you're in academics, or even if you're not, volunteer, play in a game, just have the moment. And real quick, there's a large contrast between what you do in these games and what you do for a CTF.
True. Different,
Um,
totally different games.
yeah,
Night and day, the kind of
and
game.
I've done CTFs. I've even done them as part of the school where it's like, this for this semester we're all playing in the Halloween cyber CTF that's put on by St. Louis.
Yeah.
And I
Jeopardy
was like,
style, right?
yeah,
Jeopardy style, pick the puzzle, you know, solve the
and those
puzzles.
are okay, but then when you get out of it, and like especially if you go play in person, they're just it's so impersonal.
I agree. It's just you by yourself on your laptop. It feels more like,
Or if you're with a group and then you see like the rock stars that
oh, they
are,
fly through them, right?
yeah,
Yeah, I
and
get it.
like it can be a major turnoff
To
to
Yeah, to a lot of people, unfortunately. And but then that's why I kind of caution with previous iterations of CyberForce and CCDC, depending on how you do it, it can be a turnoff too in terms of not being welcome enough, or you know, just like thrashing on the blue team too much, right? It can be a turnoff in those instances as well. And but I feel recently though, both competitions have put things in place to make that less so, fortunately. So I've been
yeah,
happy with the evolution there.
and it
But
that was
yeah, I agree with you with the CTF stuff.
and it was definitely communicated to us as red teamers for CCDC this year. They were like, you know, the red we can't you can't you can't pound on the blue team.
Good.
You can't knock them out in the first 10 minutes and
Uh-huh.
not let them play.
Good.
There's going to be better blue teamers than others, and this needs to be a fair game. So
Yeah.
I think that evolution is happening,
Good.
because I think one of the things that I'm noticing is that I think academics is going to become more online.
Yes.
And I think that if games, I hope CCDC, and I also almost hope CyberForce can adopt some kind of hybrid model, both in person and online. And that was something that was communicated to
Ooh.
me from both red and blue, was that in both games, from students and from red teamers, that they were like, the fact that I don't have to go makes it so that I want to do it more. Like, I don't
Ah.
have to physically attend. Now,
Okay.
that being said, I love the sandwiches at Argonne. I love meeting
Uh-huh.
everybody. I love seeing the supercomputer. Like,
Uh-huh.
I'm just, it's like I'm at Disneyland, right?
Yeah.
But that's just me. That's because I'm a nerd. And like, I'm around computers, I'm around people who do computing for a living. That's just, whoa. But there's a lot of people out there that I think that what I've heard is that they liked CCDC better this year
Uh-huh.
because there wasn't, they, because normally for Midwest and South Atlantic, like if you don't go to Moraine,
Uh-huh.
you usually don't place in the higher ranks.
Okay.
Because yeah, they live stream things and things like that, but there's just that, there's more of a community
Sure.
aspect, right?
Yeah.
But people this year, I've heard that more schools competed,
Yes.
more students competed,
Mhm.
because they didn't have to go
Plane tickets.
drive to
Yeah.
Chicago or Berkeley or wherever.
Mhm.
Um, they can just do it from their home.
Mhm.
And so if there can be some more of that hybrid aspect to it,
Oh,
I
okay.
think that would be cool, right? Where there's like, because they do that in CCDC, where it's like, if you can't travel, you can remote in and play.
Yeah.
But if you can travel, do come.
Uh-huh.
So taking what I saw from CCDC and what I'd like to see for CyberForce, I think that option would be great,
Yeah.
because then you have the red teamer that was like, oh, I want to volunteer, but like I can't take off time to go travel.
Mhm.
Um, Now they can, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And for CCDC, I think a lot more people played this year because it was all online. So
Okay.
that's my couple cents about that. I
Okay.
think that there are a lot of people that I've met in these games that have a lot of I don't know if it's anxiety or they just don't like being around people,
I get
but
it.
yeah,
I know a lot of people like that, in our industry.
yeah, yeah,
So.
there are some phenomenal practitioners at my school.
Mhm.
And she's a very quiet person, but she's
Mhm.
very skilled. But she said
Yes.
this year, because she could do CyberForce online,
Uh-huh.
because she could do CCDC online, she felt like because she could do that, she was able to practice and try harder.
Nice.
Yeah. So you know, and now she's got an internship and everything like that. But
Mhm.
she's mentioned that she wouldn't have gone out and done those things
Uh-huh.
if people, at the school hadn't encouraged her to play the games.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, um, just more involvement. I just, that's what I really hope for, is just more people play. Even if I don't get to red team anymore, if I can look online and see like, oh man, like hundreds of schools did CyberForce and hundreds of
Uh-huh.
schools did CCDC, I'll be
Yeah.
happy.
Yeah,
you know
too. So it's, yeah, that was like a little joke I gave to our organizers of the CyberForce competition last year, where she sent me the numbers of like the total registered blue teams. I didn't think it was like a big number. I think it was over like 500 or 600. And I was like, whoa, we're going to get like 600 players. And then she said the cutoff was about 400 teams or something, somewhere around 400 plus, somewhere around there. So I was like, oh, and then I kind of I jokingly emailed her like, man, I can't wait for CyberForce to one day have 1,000. We can still report 1,000 teams, right? That's like a really nice number. That would be so cool. We could do that. And she replied to me, one day, Candy, one day we'll get there. So
uh,
yeah, I share
yeah,
that aspiration as well.
yeah, I think I think we share that same idea that I think the real learning comes from these games.
Yes, but but then I would throw a little caveat there is like real learning comes from these games, but then there's also a lot of responsibility on the organizers to make sure that all the pieces are in place to maximize the learning experience and opportunity. You know, so I would
Yes.
throw that out there as well. Yeah,
Yes.
as a
I think
qualifier.
that, yeah. And maybe that's me, the participant, and you an organizer, and that's our
Yeah,
difference there, you know, because
yeah,
I'm just sitting there, you know, doing my best, trying hard, and then, you know, you're having to keep all the ships afloat. So,
yes, yeah, indeed.
but
Okay, yeah,
yeah, no, again, please, if anybody is watching this or listening to this, if you've got the opportunity to volunteer, do it. Just do it. It's so worth it. You don't have to be the best. You
true.
just have to show up, and you just have to practice. You just have to try. It'll be
Exactly.
fun. I
Yeah.
promise.
So Dave, actually earlier in this conversation, you actually described some of the qualities of really good red team volunteers, but
Hmm.
we already ran, past our time limit. So I think in a future video, we can touch on some of these other aspects of, red teaming, some more of the technical details, how to get more involved, right? And also the qualities of sort of how to be a really good volunteer and sort of make a bigger impact. So
Okay.
yeah,
Cool. Yeah. No.
yeah.
Yeah. We can definitely talk about that. You know,
Uh-huh.
I have a good list. I can
Cool.
share that now if you want, or I could share that some other time.
Some other time, and that's
Perfect.
that's how I want to do future versions of these podcasts. I'll probably have like a sort of a rough agenda items so we can sort of really get into all these really good topics that we want to cover.
Sure. Perfect.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Let's definitely do that.
awesome.
Awesome.
Okay, yeah, thanks Dave.
Yeah. No problem.
Okay.